Zoom. Shing. G'day guys, Toz20 here, and welcome back to City Skylines Down Under. It is really good to be back in Broken Hill. I've been itching to get back for a really long time, and today's episode is something that I've been wanting to build for a really long time. So we've built a lot of the commercial area, we've got some suburbs sprawling around, but there is not very many places for the Sims of Broken Hill to really unwind, relax. Yeah, we're going to be building some parks, and I'm really excited for this because this Australian parks are really unique, and we have some sports, we've got some games that we play that I think are pretty much unlike a lot of other places around the world. For this build, I'm going to be referring to drone footage around my neighborhood because, well, why not? I love this drone, and it really helped out to get a good idea of how we kind of do our recreational areas in Australia. But before I do get into the nitty-gritty of today's episode, I have to apologise for not uploading the map to the workshop. I did promise that on episode 4, and I've got some good excuses, some very exciting excuses. So around the time that I made that promise that I was going to upload the map, P. Delmo got in touch and asked if I wanted a map theme specific for Broken Hill. That is like the best offer ever because I was using Theme Mixer mod before, and that has a couple of little quirks to it. I mean, I do love that mod, but you know, in terms of sharing a map with you guys, I really do need my own map theme. So he's been working on that for ages. I keep on giving him more jobs to do, so I do really appreciate his cooperation with it. It's I'm basically, I mean, you can see the map theme right now. I mean, this is 99% complete. There's just a couple of other little things that is going to change for me that have more to do with the mine side of things rather than the city. But the map theme is so good. I really love it. And because the map theme is changing, I do have to touch up a whole bunch of areas that I was, you know, the colors have changed now because of the new theme. You know, it's just all things that you have to do when you change map themes. So yeah, sorry about that. Totally my fault. Made just massive. I was very ambitious with thinking that I could get this map done so quickly. But that is enough for apologies. I would really like to get into today's episode because it is so good, and I'm so happy to be using the drone for this episode. So what I'm doing right now is I'm building a cricket pitch, and you know, I mean, if you know anything about Australian sports, we you know, we are very particular about some sports, cricket being one of them, rugby being the other one. I mean, we're pretty fanatic about it, so it makes a lot of sense to have sporting fields actually revolve around those sports. And you know, this will not be the only cricket pitch or rugby field that you're going to see in I was about to say Springwood in Broken Hill. Now that I've kind of figured out this template, it's going to be really easy to implement all around the town. I'm using Google Earth to float around Kalgoorlie just to get a bit of an idea of how they look within this town, within the city. They're pretty unique because this sort of grass doesn't grow naturally within this desert. So it's really interesting to see how they grow within this town. You know, there's just this one patch of green, and then as it sort of spreads off into the desert, it just goes to like rough dirt again, which is really interesting. I love this sort of texture, and because there is barely any green in Broken Hill, in Kalgoorlie, Pete Delmo has made sure that I don't have any grass textures, which is really good, but it's tricky to make these fields because I don't have any textures that I can lay down. So I struggled a lot, to be honest. I struggled to figure out how I'm going to put down this green grass without using heaps of decals and other sort of ways of doing it. I ended up using Ronix's grass, which I haven't really used properly before, but now that I have, it's beautiful grass. It's really lovely, especially when you turn up the graphics to the max and you can really see the detail on it. This pitch turns out really nice. So it's not I wouldn't call it a professional pitch. This is definitely just a neighborhood cricket ground, and I wanted it to be somewhat smaller than the regular, like the probably more professional grounds. And I've also just kind of gone in and put in some little weeds just poking through the grass just to really make it look rough, because I wanted it to be a pretty rough patch. I didn't get this idea from Google Earth. This is where the drone footage comes in, because if you're going to get really close to the detail of the ground, I needed to get close to the ground, funny enough. And the drone footage was really useful as well to figure out what else lies within a recreational area, sports field within Australia. I could not figure that out through the grainy Google Earth. So I ended up taking the Spark just down the road to my neighbourhood park, and just to get a bit of an idea of how Australian fields look, because they're unique, like I said, and this was really useful to get a really good idea of how things look. You can notice that even in a temperate environment like Sydney, the fields aren't as green as you'd imagine. They're rough, they've got dirt sticking out of it, weeds. So this is where I got the idea to put down these weeds and to just rough up the grass just a little bit. Like especially in Broken Hill, where grass doesn't grow as natural as it does in Sydney, it was really important that I got those elements into it. And I also got a really good idea of what else lies around fields within Australia, because I didn't really think about those cricket pitches where you can just practice the swing. You don't actually have to go into a massive field. I didn't really think about that. Baseball fields lie within the corners of a lot of these fields, so that's like I didn't incorporate. I kind of totally forgot about it, but instead I ended up putting in a whole bunch of other little elements. Tennis courts, skate parks. I wanted to really capture that Australian feel within these places. Now, it was really useful going to the spot. I had to go to another spot to get another idea of what else lies within these fields. Also, just a bit of context of where I'm filming. This is the eastern suburbs of Sydney. I actually wish I lived here. It's not my total neighborhood. It's like the neighborhood next to my neighborhood. Beautiful bay run, really nice water scenes. You can see the skyline as you just saw before. This flight gives me some really good inspiration for Broken Hill. I didn't even think about putting in some AFL posts or even the amount of trees that lie around a field. So getting back to what I'm doing on screen, and as you can tell, I can't incorporate everything that I see from that fly into City Skylines, and especially not for Broken Hill, because we're talking about two completely different environments, and even towns and even cities. So it's kind of important to take what I see from the drone footage and then kind of just take that inspiration and turn it into something of my own. What I'm doing here is I'm making this AFL field, and I wanted to make it totally custom. There's not really any AFL posts on the workshop, so I ended up finding these flagpoles, and to create these posts I just left the ones in the middle at the same length and then just lowered the ones on the outside. It stands for the Australian Football League, and it's a type of rugby that is totally unique to Australia. We invented it, I guess. I don't really know too much about it, but I do know that these goals, if you basically kick the ball between the two middle ones, that's 6 points. On the outside posts are 1 point, and when you're running with the ball, you got to bounce every 6 meters or something like that. I haven't played it in so long and haven't watched it in a really long time either, so super rusty with the scoring system and how you play, but I do know that it's super unique and it's pretty unusual, and if you don't really know much about it, definitely go and check it out. But it's quite essential to build something like that within Broken Hill, because being an Australian series, you got to try and keep it as unique as possible. And I wanted to keep this field very unique. I didn't want to go completely off the footage. I wanted to make it pretty much my own. Something that I noticed with these fields is that the actual field is oval, and so I wanted to keep true to that and create this oval fencing. So just as a bit of a boundary, and some little entrances, just some gaps in between. Right now though, on screen, and I am placing down a unique footpath, something that I was kind of struggling with, because with the grass that I'm using, because it's like a prop, it sits above the ground, so that when I do drag a footpath underneath it, well, it goes underneath. So, that makes it really tricky to make a footpath. Instead, I'm using these, I think they're curbs, and I'm just using them as a footpath, and they work really well. Like, once they kind of get the flow of it, it works really nicely. It actually makes it look really unique, and it makes it look really interesting, and it kind of gives me a bit more flexibility when it comes to creating that different texture between the green grass and the orange earth underneath it. It just kind of helps to break that up. I do end up dragging a footpath over those like unique curved pathways, because I did want people visiting this park. So in the cinematics, I think you might see some people walking around, but we do really need more people in Broken Hill to get that. I'm also plopping down some of the tennis courts that I was speaking about. I wanted there to be like lots of different activities within this area. It is a fairly large park. It doesn't really just have one type of sporting area. It's kind of an area where you'd come for pretty much everything. And also, by the way, I noticed from the footage that lights are really important within these fields, because a lot of people do play at night time, especially after work, or if there's a match on or something like that. Again, something else I really didn't think about until I actually took that footage. I refer back to it a lot. It's so helpful. I'm not just justifying my drone, my purchase. That's actually a really useful tool for this. In terms of what next for Broken Hill, there's a lot I want to achieve within this series. This series, if you're not familiar with it, is unique for its mine. This whole town is based around its ore mine and the work that goes into it, and the industrial side of a town, I guess. But for this series, it's really important that the town functions exactly how a town should function. City Skylines is a bit of a mess in terms of how cities and towns sort of function, and you do lose a lot of FPS, as you get into the detail side of things. But in comparison to Springwood, which is just a giant city, and this would probably end up just being a town, I'm going to have a lot of flexibility with how it works and operates. So I do want it to function. I do want there to be, a good balance between residents and commercial and industry. So, I do want to get the education side of things happening, fire stations, recreation. I want it to be a really good balance. If money was turned on, I'd love to be seeing a profit. I don't know, it'd be really nice to have a bit of a series where I do get to, use the game as the game is, I guess, intentionally made. Whereas I think I heard Strictosis say the other day that, we are pretty much using this game as a 3D model building simulator, because we are just basically building for the fun of it. And, I do love doing that, but I would also love to see a function in cities. So, fingers crossed, the plan is to get this town totally functioning and, operating on its own without me worrying every time I take it off pause. This series is not exclusive to Broken Hill, if you haven't noticed already. I'm recording this episode a bit in advance to an episode that I plan to release before this episode. Oof, does that make sense? But hopefully if you're watching this, you already know what I'm talking about with the drone footage. But essentially this series is going to be based around all of Australia, recreating how Australia looks and feels and the atmosphere of this country. In my mind, there's like 2 parts of Australia that I want to recreate, and that's the outback and then there's the coastline. And the coastline changes basically every state you go to, but I would really love to recreate the East Coast, which is going to be the next part of the Down Under series, is recreating the East Coast. I'm going to do quite a bit of traveling around over the next few months, getting a bit of an idea of what the East Coast really looks like and feels like, and trying to basically recreate that in one series, in one town. I think that's going to be pretty achievable because the East Coast of Australia is pretty unique and pretty interesting. I've already done a lot of traveling around here, so I can kind of draw back on a lot of memories as well. And also even just being in Sydney, which is on the East Coast, gives me a lot of flexibility to actually get some footage and get some inspiration for that build. So, that is a part of the series that I'm really looking forward to. I can't wait to get into that. So in terms of Down Under, there's going to be like 2 elements, Broken Hill and then whatever the town is going to be on the East Coast. Haven't quite got there yet. But yeah, I should probably stop talking about this because I don't really know what episode I release before this episode, if that makes sense. I'm basically pre-recording this one in advance. I'm being very organized. But moving on from that topic, and let's get into what I'm doing because I'm really happy with how this little area turned out. So something that I've noticed is within pretty much every playing field in Australia, we have an area for people to practice batting and practice bowling for cricket. And they're like these little pitches, little corners where, they're all fenced off, and you have basically like 4 or 5 in a row where, you can kind of practice those things. And, something I didn't really think about. So, I wanted to put that into this little town, this little area. And, but I also wanted to make it a little bit more outbacky, a little bit more Broken Hill style. So, I didn't want it to be on grass. I wanted it to be more on this dry red earth. So I just put some decals underneath it to make it look like it's been worn out a little bit. And just some fences, and also just using some of those, I'm trying to remember what they are. I think they're markers for a road, but I've put them down as if they're the wickets. I think that's a pretty cool look, and when you get down really close, it looks really, really nice. I'm also just trying to break up a bit of the textures a little bit by placing down a lot of foliage. This is a park. Even though it is in the middle of the desert, it's still a park. There's still going to be a lot of trees around, and that's something that I've sort of spoken about a lot within Broken Hill, is that there, just because this is the desert and it's extremely hot, it doesn't mean that there's not a lot of foliage and a lot of bush. Australia is full of foliage and full of bush, and it's you'd be quite surprised at how green the deserts are around here. It's basically like a massive contrast. You get these great green trees, lots of foliage, but then underneath is just this dry red earth, and that is pretty much just the way the foliage has adapted to this environment. It's pretty amazing. It's always really incredible when you drive out to those areas and you see how well the environment, or how well the trees sort of adapt to their surroundings. It's really unique, and I think it's really cool. So that's something that I'm trying to keep in mind as I do place down these little areas. This last little part of the build is the first elementary school of Broken Hill, and I wanted it to be somewhat large. This isn't a small school. This is a quite a big one. This is an elementary school. In Australia, we call them primary schools, and you go to a primary school from kindergarten, so that'll be about the age of 5, and you'll leave at about the age of 12. Something that I wanted to achieve with this look is I wanted it to have the feeling of a functioning school. So I wanted there to be a car park that functions, and an entrance, and then I had to make sure that the entire place was fenced off really well. So all schools are really well fenced so that, when the kids do go out for playground or for, when they're having recess, then they are fully enclosed and that the teachers don't actually have to worry about that side of things. So that's like something that's really, really important. I also wanted to use, because this school is pretty modular. I think there's the main building. They have a kindergarten, which I just sort of make it out as if it's just another side of the building. And then there's a gymnasium, which we don't really call it a gymnasium. We call it just a hall or something like that. In terms of where I'm getting the inspiration from, I'm basically just pulling it from anywhere around Broken Hill, just looking at different sort of schools and how they sort of are laid out. And, this would be a great school to go to because most schools are a lot smaller and a lot of the space is sort of being taken up by expanding classrooms. Like, I don't know what it's like at primary school in your country or from where you are, but schools are pretty much at capacity, pretty much anywhere you go. Well, maybe not so much in regional areas in Australia, but if you go to any major town, any major city, the schools are full. And even if you go onto the playgrounds, they've got what we call demountable classrooms, and they've just got demountable classrooms where basically a field used to be. And you'll see me place them down pretty shortly. But what I'm doing on screen now is I'm just creating a bit of safety around the roads because this is somewhat of a main road. So, with a lot of kids sort of coming out of the school, you've got to make sure there's a bit of safety involved. And now that I'm actually looking at this footage, I've realized that I've missed out on a lot of key details that, exist around the roads of schools. First up, there's a lot of decals on the roads, a lot of markings to say that a school is coming up and that they have to slow down, cars have to slow down. There's a lot more pedestrian crossings. And we also have these signs for, we got this school hours basically where, between 8 o'clock and 9:30, you have to go this certain speed limit. It's like 40 kilometers an hour. And those signs don't exist on the workshop. It'd be so cool if they did, because they're like, if you live in Australia, you know those signs, because quite often you'd just be going regular speed and then all of a sudden you're crawling at 40, which is really annoying, but totally worth it. So yeah, totally missed out on some safety things there. I might have to go back and re-detail those little areas. But yeah, you can see me just like shuffling around these buildings because I wanted the space to be pretty much exactly how schools really act within Australia. So you've got the main building and then you've got like the classrooms that branch off from there. And you've also got a courtyard that, kids spend their recess and lunch times. I wanted there to be a couple of different areas within the school. So if this is a K-6 school, then there'd be places for kindergarten kids to play and then older kids to play. So I wanted there to be an area where there's playgrounds and then there's places just to hang out. If you did go to primary school in Australia, you'll know that there's always some sort of central tree that's has been there for like 100 years, and it's sort of like in the center of the school. If you did go to school in Australia, then you probably know what I'm talking about. It's like the main tree. So I placed down a big old gum just in the middle of that playground, just to sort of act as that tree. And like, I feel like the foliage, I'm using a lot of P. Delmo's foliage that he's created over the last year. And but there's just so much trees, so much stuff I can actually place down to really create that Australian feel. It's I feel like in terms of foliage and bush, City of Skylines is good for Australian. Like, it's good. Like, we've got a lot of stuff that like make it feel really Australian. Whereas in terms of like houses and stuff, kind of missed the mark a little bit. But just by making things a little bit more custom, I can actually achieve that look pretty well. And usually I'm playing with the new theme a lot. It's so good. Like, I really love this theme, and I really can't wait to release it. It might already be released. I don't know. Like I said before, this episode, I'm doing the commentary way in advance, so I don't know whether we've released the theme yet, or even have released the map yet. Probably not. I don't know, I'm speculating. I'm way in advance, which is so good, but it's a little bit tricky to kind of figure out what's being released or not. Maybe I've put up a message up there on the screen or something like that. Here's a little playgrounds that I've been making, and as you can see, a lot of these areas are just, there's no grass, it's just dirt. And I'm noticing this when floating around Kalgoorlie, is that like a lot of areas are just dirt. It's just ground, it's not grass. That might seem a bit crazy, but when you actually go to a place like Kalgoorlie or Broken Hill or anywhere in the middle of Australia, you will notice that it's primarily dirt and dust and this red earth, and you get used to it, and it just feels, it just feels like a really authentic Australian experience when you go out there. It feels like the real deal. Whereas when you're in the city, you kind of feel like you're getting the watered down version of Australia. At least that's how I feel. Just made that field. Really love how the field turns out, and I've just returned back to the courts of the playground just to place down some shelter, because being in the middle of the deserts, I mean, even in Sydney we have these, but you have these shade cloths, you have these areas that are shaded off, and these are usually new additions to schools. Like back in the day, they didn't really have shade for kids to play in, but now we're getting a bit more sun aware. It's pretty much, it's a requirement to have some sort of shade for kids to play. And I'm not sure if that's similar in other schools around the world. I mean, please let me know. I'm always curious to find out how they compare. You also see me placing down this rugby field, and I got this idea from the footage that I took around Sydney. Is these fields are, I mean, it's basically rugby, AFL, or cricket. It is pretty much like the stock standard playing fields for Australian fields, I guess. We bloody love those sports. Every now and again, you might see the soccer fields. I mean, they're kind of creeping up more so than like before. But yeah, I think just even placing down the rugby post just make you go, yeah, like that's an Australian school, that's an Australian field. And I really love this little neighborhood that I placed right next to the school. I think that fits in really nicely. It's there's always like a neighborhood, a little couple of houses that are right next to a school, and I remember like as a kid you'd always kick the ball over the fence, and then you'd have to like jump the fence or get the neighbors to chuck over the ball again. Yeah, so I feel like these people, I mean, if there were some ball decals or some ball props, I'd probably place them onto the roof or something like that. Hey, if there is something like that, definitely throw me in that direction. It's those little details, you guys. You know how I operate within City Skylines. I love those little details. It's yeah, it's kind of my thing. And these dirt roads are so good. I feel like this is like one of the things that you place down and just makes it feel like the outback. But guys, that is pretty much it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed putting it together. It's one of my favorite builds. Actually, I feel like I might say that in every episode. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See you later.